Thank you for joining me again at No Big Secrets Yoga and Astrology. And of course, politics, politics, politics. We cannot get away from politics at all. So I'm going to do my preliminary analysis and show you a technique that I'm going to be keeping an eye on as the midterms kind of start approaching. And so my one caveat for this is it's going to be very difficult to make an accurate 2018 election prediction um, because there's so much going on this summer. Right now, it's let's see, it's May 23rd today, and so because Mars is transiting through Capricorn right now in the Vedic system, there's a lot of stuff going on, and so it really depends on what happens. Like really in June, July, and August are really going to set the tone for the midterm elections. However, so we don't have a context, but we can at least take a look at the planets. And not necessarily about using astrology for mundane predictions to get it right. I always like to use it as basically a technique or a method to find the best technique or something that works the best. So there are many, many different ways to analyze elections by looking at candidates charts, by looking at mundane charts. Some people use the condition of the chart over Washington at the time. And so what we're going to be using today is we're going to be using a mundane chart. I'm going to show you a technique that I was taught a little while ago here about how you can use this. This is more Western astrology, but we're actually going to look at both. We're going to look at the Western chart and the Vedic chart using this method that I was talking about. So, first of all, is there a blue wave coming? That's the thing I think about. A lot of people want to know. So here's, let's put this to the test. So the technique that I'm talking about uses Saturn to represent Democrats and it uses Jupiter to represent Republicans. And I think the reason for this is Saturn is technically, or like its representation is all about hard work, the commoners and the people, and Jupiter is more about, for Republicans, wealth, expansion, not necessarily wealth, but Jupiter can represent wealth, expanding things. And really, I see the Democrat one more than Jupiter being associated with Republicans, but let's just see how this looks. So this is the Vedic chart for November 6th, and I pulled this chart for about 10 p.m., which is roughly when all the polls close for Washington, D.C. So if we take a look right off the bat, we see Jupiter here is going to be at 5 degrees of, this is the sign of Scorpio, and Saturn is going to be at 11 degrees of Sagittarius. So reading this from the Vedic perspective, the first thing we want to take a look at is the condition of the planet in the sign that it sits in. So for these, Saturn is in Jupiter's sign right here. So in a sense, Saturn is being controlled by Jupiter right now, and Saturn and Jupiter are actually friends, believe it or not, in the Vedic zodiac. So Saturn is not in an enemy sign, it's actually in a friendly sign. So if we take a look at Jupiter here, Jupiter is in the sign of Scorpio, and Scorpio is ruled by Mars, which is actually a friend of Jupiter. So Jupiter's not in a hostile sign either. So as far as the sign placement, this is pretty much a wash, okay? The next thing that I like to look for is where are the depositors of all these planets? And the depositor means it's the planet that rules the sign that the current planet is in. So here with Saturn, we have Jupiter here, and Jupiter's in Mars's sign, so this comes down to Mars. Mars, the way I read this is Mars and Jupiter here are in a square, which is kind of a rough conjunction. If you take a look over here at this chart, let's see, this will actually show the Western aspects here, even though it's in the Vedic system. Let's see, so we have Jupiter here being squared by Mars. This is actually a pretty stressful connection. So the way that I'm reading this is the ruler of Jupiter, or the Republicans, or what's controlling the Republicans' chart, is actually going from its sign of exaltation, where it's very strong, into a sign where it's really not as well placed. So in Vedic astrology, let's see, Aquarius is actually ruled by Saturn, and so this really kind of is indicative to me of people not showing up, lack of enthusiasm. So it seems like everything and anything that was going on while Mars was in Capricorn here is literally coming to a head at the election, because Mars is going to be transiting out of Capricorn a couple of days before the election. So this kind of shows me that somebody's not going to show up. And if I'm going to look at this chart, it could be that one way to read this is Republican voters are not going to show up because the energy and enthusiasm is not here. Now, the thing is, though, this is going to be translating over from the Mars and Capricorn, so it's not, Mars doesn't have the exact energy of Aquarius yet, but it's kind of in a weak position. So it's like in a transition period, okay? And another thing, too, if you see here, is the south node of the moon is square Uranus, is square Rahu here, and is also square Jupiter. So in a sense, Jupiter is taking kind of a, how do I put it? Is that Jupiter? No, I'm sorry, take that back. Jupiter isn't participating in this, but we have some planets here that are participating in a kind of a grand cross. It's not an official grand cross because a lot of astrologers, and I tend to agree with them, think that in mundane astrology, the nodes can't have aspects to themselves. So traditionally with aspect patterns, you actually have to have an actual physical body there. And the nodes not being physical planets, don't count. But this kind of shows that Venus here, this is also pretty unique. Venus here is retrograde, and Venus only goes retrograde probably 5% of the time. It's a very rare retrograde. And Venus being retrograde here in the sign of Libra kind of shows, how do I put it? So Libra is all about seeking balance and things like that. It's also conjunct the moon here. So it seems like people are trying to seek balance on stuff, but Venus not functioning the way that it should. Usually when a retrograde Venus doesn't act on passion, it's actually a little bit more logical. So this is actually kind of a little bit not disturbing, but it's interesting because it's opposed Uranus too, and Uranus opposed Venus is it's a stressful aspect, and what it can do is lead to unpredictable conflicts. So that's kind of how I'm seeing this. So if I'm going to make a call on this, this looks like somebody, one party is not going to show. One of the parties, and this could be the Republicans. This looks like Republicans aren't going to show en masse. Either that or they're burnt out, which could lead to a Republican win. However, Saturn here doesn't really show any signs of like some sort of how do I put it? Some sort of like overwhelming strength. So looking at this chart, the Vedic chart really looks like a wash to me. It's really difficult to tell on this one because there really is no direct indicators of planetary strength, right? And so the one way to read a wash is perhaps the Republicans keep both the House and the Senate. Now, remember that there's a lot of Democrats up for re-election in the Senate. So they're really at a detriment. So the chances of the Republicans taking more seats in the Senate is higher. Now the House, this could really put the House up for grabs, which in case will lead to a split government. In that case, I would call that a Democratic win. All right, now let's take a look at the tropical chart. The tropical chart is basically Western astrology or the tropical zodiac, and it's 25 degrees ahead of the Vedic zodiac, okay? So when I look at this, this is interesting. So we have Saturn right here is actually in a very strong position. It's in the sign of Capricorn, and Saturn does well in Capricorn. Now, if we take a look at Jupiter here, Jupiter, Uranus, and the nodes of the moon here are all in kind of like Sandhi aspects, and they're all on the cusp of these signs, which means this shows a major transition for the Republican Party because Jupiter is participating in this. So Rahu and Ketu switching here into like let's see, this is Leo and this is Capricorn, switching into those signs generally means a shifting of energy or shifting of focus. So I'm taking a look at this one here, and I could read this one of two ways. There's going to be a Democratic win, or the Republicans are going to have a victory over what do I want to call it, the establishment. But this chart really puts the Democrats in very good positioning. Now, I'm going to basically say that looking at this chart, I'm going to say this one actually favors the Democrats. So the Vedic one is a wash. The Western one favors the Democrats with the caveat of knowing what's going to be going on or not knowing what's going to be going on this summer. So that is my preliminary analysis. We have a Democratic victory on one, which would show blue wave, and then on the other one, it's a wash, and I don't really know. So we will definitely revisit this more as it comes closer to election time. And really, I think like the best time to start doing this stuff is in late September. And also too, I mean, that's when you can start actually matching up individuals individuals' charts and things like that. So, all right, that is all I had for today, and hopefully I will see you tomorrow.